Welcome back here on Live Now from Fox 620 over on the East Coast and 320 on the West Coast. We'll get back to our coverage of the Baltimore Bridge collapse in a matter of minutes, but I do want to head to some breaking news out of the Middle East. Take a look as 3 Israelis have been wounded in a terror attack on school buses and other vehicles on a major highway in the West Bank. The information coming in from the Times of Israel and the photo and video there on your screen provided by the Israel War Room on X. Officials saying a Palestinian terrorist who has not been tracked down shot at 2 bulletproof school buses and 2 cars, injuring a child and 2 other people. One of those people believed to be critically wounded, and all of this comes as Israel's war on Hamas approaches its 6th month. Avraham Levine is an intelligence analyst at the Alma Research Center in northern Israel, joining us live to talk more about this and the latest developments here. Thank you so much, as always, for taking the time to be here with us.
My pleasure.
So first off, I do want to talk a little bit about this latest report of a terror attack. It seems as though these terror attacks are happening quite a bit. Are we seeing more of them since October 7th, or has this just been the way of life there?
Well, in a sense, I know every time we hear about a terrorist attack or an attack in the north in Kiryat Shmona, 8 o'clock in the morning yesterday, it seems like the situation is escalating. I still maintain my opinion that there's peaks and lows, and I don't see a clear escalation. But this is a routine in many ways. This is not surprising. Remember, this week, 2 other terrorists with Kalashnikov AK-47s that crossed from Jordan and were planning an attack in Tel Aviv were caught in the same area of the Jordan Valley. This is a very long border with Jordan that's difficult to guard, and terrorists have been using that border from the north. There's a smuggling route from Syria to Jordan to Israel of both drugs and weapons. Remember, a smuggling operation was thwarted last week, also coming in from Jordan, starting from Hezbollah in Lebanon, including tens of guns. I cannot recognize this gun specifically, if it's a Kalashnikov or an M4. The ones that were caught in the last operation were mainly American, U.S. military M4s that were caught. They're using them more and more. Apparently, not that I can say this with any proof, apparently from other operations, American operations all over the Middle East that made their way to Jordan and from Jordan to terrorists here in Israel and Judea and Samaria. Another point that is pretty clear is that the smaller the operation is, the harder it is to catch. This is one person gets the gun, and one morning he just steps out to the main road. Route 90 doesn't really look like a highway in the States, but it's a very long route from the Sea of Galilee, basically from the north all the way to Eilat. And thousands of vehicles use it all the time. I use it routinely. And as you see, buses there, some of them are, as in this case, because it was students, young students, was better protected, bulletproof. But my private vehicle is not bulletproof. And this can happen again and again. That's why more and more people are getting guns here and concerned. So this is a terrible event, and my guess is we'll catch the guy today, tomorrow, next week. Eventually we get them.
And one thing that did stand out to me, you just kind of touched on it, but the fact that these buses are bulletproof, is that fairly common to see?
In student buses in Judea and Samaria are generally bulletproof. I'd like to show also the other side of things here. Obviously, the ones that were worst hurt were the ones targeted, but the consequence later on are mostly on Palestinian civilians that are not necessarily aware of this attack, because this is just forcing IDF and police to go deeper into the villages here looking for this terrorist. So the route is reopened. We're going to continue using this road. Life is back to normal a few hours later. Palestinians afterwards are going to suffer from the consequence of every terrorist attack. This is the same in other places. I realize the worst of October 7th, we thought was October 7th. But for the people of Gaza, the worst came later. Terrorism does not work and does not help the cause of the terrorists. It harms them, and I think they should learn by now.
Let's talk a little bit more about the war itself here, as we know that we've heard now for quite a while that that Rafah operation is going to happen. And I do want to get your take on this. Why is that Rafah operation so important?
Well, in Rafah, the last operating Hamas brigade is located. So we have 4 battalions operating brigade, which we do not want to leave there untouched and able to regain control and advance to, back to Khan Yunis and then start climbing north. That's one angle. Another reason is obviously commanders, assets, and maybe hostages. And the last point is obviously something that no one seems to realize, but if you look at the map behind me, Gaza has another border with Egypt. And if we do not block, if we don't gain control in some way over the route between Gaza and Egypt, we're leaving an exit, an entrance for weapons, for smuggling, for hostages, for commanders to come back and regain control. So I think Rafah is extremely important, and we cannot leave it. It actually makes the whole operation useless if we just leave the gates open for them to reclaim control over Gaza Strip.
And we've heard from multiple U.S. officials now who have said that that Rafah operation should not happen. They have given their take on it. Does any of that matter overall to Israel? Is it going to put a stop to the Rafah operation? My assumption is no.
Well, it's definitely an obstruction of justice in my eyes. On one hand, U.S. calls for the destruction of Hamas and recognizes Hamas as a terrorist organization. And on the other hand, our hands are tied if we do not comply and agree with the U.S. demands not to go into Rafah. So which one is it? Should we ruin Hamas, stop terrorism, or are we allowing them to regain control and not touch Rafah and leave the leaders there, the tunnels there, the weapons there, and just leave it as is? I think you can't play both sides. If there's a better way to take care of the situation, I'd like to hear. But as I see it, Israel is allowing the humanitarian aid into Gaza. I don't see many people really hungry in Gaza. I think that's false. I think there's plenty of food in Gaza, and trucks are going in every day. I think we will allow civilians to leave Rafah so there's less civilians, unless Hamas, which I'm sure they will, use their people again as human shields. And that's on Hamas, that's not on Israel. And I hope U.S. leaders appreciate this, understand this, and not talk out of just uneducational news and just not understanding the situation in terms of what's going on the ground.
Let's talk about the operation at Shifa Hospital, because at last check, we've been told that about 200 terrorists have been killed, according to the IDF. They've been taken out there at Shifa Hospital. And it's important to note we are talking about a hospital where these folks were located, also dozens upon dozens of people arrested. In your experience here, is that considered to be a successful operation?
Wow, was this a successful operation? I learned so much from this operation, and I think everybody should look at this as what happened in Shifa Hospital. We already learned and knew that Hamas is using civilians as a human shield. We see them using medical assets, infrastructure for everything. We see this with ambulances. We see this with hospitals, anything they can use, so we don't stop them and their civilians will be more defended than their leaders. Another thing I can learn is obviously this was a success because, just to remind everyone, we were already in Shifa months ago. And everyone sort of checked that box and said that's taken care of. So IDF leaves. It doesn't remain a vacuum. Hamas goes back and does this again. Complete disregard to the people in the hospital. Because remember, this is an operating hospital. Tens of doctors and nurses and probably hundreds of sick, wounded people are there during the operation. And Hamas is still using it. And you see the numbers. Would you believe an operating hospital is used by hundreds of terrorists? There's not one guy running in and hiding under a bed. Hundreds of terrorists are in a hospital, and Israel is doing all we can to allow Hamas and Gaza people to use this hospital, but for the right reasons, not as a military post.
My last question for you here, something that stood out to me, I was reading an article in the Jerusalem Post that was talking about how it appears Israel has learned that Hamas does have a lot more fighters than were initially thought. It sounds as though the initial assumption was more of an estimate, but your thoughts on that, as it does appear that there are more members, fighters, terrorists in Hamas than originally thought?
I don't see a surprise in the number of Hamas fighters. I think the number thrown around was 30,000. I think that's still the working assumption that that's what Hamas has. I think the complicated situation and what might have surprised us is the tunnel, the underground infrastructure, and their ability to hold on to it and maintain a routine underground life while attacking us all through Gaza with very small but short and accurate attacks, just surprising us in places that we don't expect them to come out of. But in terms of the numbers, I'm not surprised in the number of fighters. I may be surprised with the amount of weapons, which leads me to ask, are weapons still being brought into Gaza during the war, and where from? Because they're not coming in from Israel, and they're not coming in from the sea. And that raises the question again of our neighbor in peace, Egypt, controlling another part of this border.
All right. Avraham Levine, as always, thank you so much for taking the time to join us and help break down some of the latest developments there in the Middle East. Always breaking details happening pretty much on an hourly basis, it seems. Is there anything else you want to add about any of this before I let you go?
I don't know if I can add much more. It's a beautiful day here in Israel, and kids are at schools, and people, not much tourism, I'll admit that, but we're routine life. And on the other hand, during Purim, the last holiday on Sunday, alarms went off here in the Golan Heights, 9:30 in the morning. A day afterwards, also in the north, alarms went off again. A day afterwards, 30 rockets or tens of rockets into Kiryat Shmona, one person killed, a lot of infrastructure, houses, industrial areas completely ruined. Israel is still at war in the north, in the south, Jordan Valley. And I think as long as our enemies continue to fight, Israel is forced to stay at war. And we expect support from the Western moral world, our allies, to support our efforts against terrorism.
All right. Avraham, as always, thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us today. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much.